Hello students, this is the second part of my second video which basically talks about the diagnostic testing modalities of HIV. Now in this particular half of the video I am going to be telling you about the different strategies which are proposed by the National AIDS Control Organization for diagnosing HIV infection. I will also be dealing about the different modalities or the precautions that need to be considered to be taken by a healthcare worker in the event of a needle stick injury with a known or a suspected HIV positive patient during the healthcare practice. I will also be talking to you about the treatment part of HIV. How do we treat the HIV infections, and also how do we prevent the HIV infections. Okay, so let's get started. Now, just to summarize our discussion in the last video, you have three different types of testing for HIV infection. You have ELISA and the other rapid tests like immunochromatography, dot blot assay, comb test, etc. All those are screening tests. And then you have tests like Western blot assay, which are supplemental tests. And then you have confirmatory tests like PCR and P24 antigen detection. And then you have non-specific testing like CD4 count testing and altered CD4 CD8 T cell ratios and elevated neopterin and beta 2 microglobulin. So these are all the different testing modalities of diagnosing HIV infection. So having summarized it, I will just put things into perspective through this NACO testing strategy and algorithm. Actually, NACO has proposed different types of testing strategies depending on the different strata of the patients who seek confirmation of the HIV infection status. So as per this testing strategy, the NACO advises a minimum of 1 test kit to a maximum of 3 test kits to be performed, or 3 tests to be performed to label a person as having being infected with HIV symptoms or infection, okay, or AIDS. So the point that they very categorically make in this testing strategy is that all these 3 tests that we use should be based on 3 different principles. Okay, so HIV should be, or the virus, the antigen or the antibodies should be positive through all these 3 testing methods, and all these 3 testing methods should employ different testing principles. Okay, this particular component has been included in the NACO's testing strategies just so that lot of moral or ethical or legal issues which I was talking to you about in the beginning of my first part of the second video, all these issues would be sorted out. So let's go to the different testing strategies. Now this is the testing strategy 1. This particular testing strategy is basically meant for only the transfusion and transplantation safety. So if you have voluntary blood donors or if we require blood for transplantation purposes, this particular testing strategy is employed. As per this strategy, only 1 test kit is required. Now if the test turns out to be positive, we consider it as positive and we discard the blood as per the standard guidelines, ICTC guidelines. Then if the test turns out to be negative, we take it as negative, and then we consider this particular blood sample as safe to use during transplantation or for blood transfusion. Right. So this is the strategy 1, the most simplest strategy. Now strategy 2 is divided into two parts. You have 2A and 2B. Now, what does 2A say? 2A basically is meant for testing for surveillance purposes. Okay, like there may be some individuals who are practicing high risk behavior, or there may be IV drug addicts, or person who might have had blood transfusion with a HIV positive blood, even though it is very very rare nowadays, but there is possibility. So if any individual in the community feels that he or she has got exposed to a HIV source, they can voluntarily come to these ICTC centers or the testing centers, and they can actually get themselves tested, ensuring that their confidentiality and privacy is maintained at all times. So for such purposes we use this 2A testing strategy. Here we use 2 test kits, and if one test turns out to be positive, we do the second test, and even if the second test turn out to be positive, we report it as positive. If the second test is negative, we report it as negative. Okay, whereas on the other hand, if this single test itself is coming as negative, we just end the testing then and there and we report it as negative. We don't follow up it with another test kit. Okay, so that is what is the strategy 2A all about. Now what does 2B say? Now 2B testing strategy is meant for diagnosing an individual with AIDS disease indicator symptoms. Okay, so here we use 3 test kits. Okay, now we use the first test. If it is positive, go ahead. If it is negative, here only we can report it as negative, and we can look for any alternative diagnosis in this patient. Right, so if it is positive, what can we do? We do the testing with the second kit. If both the second test and the first test is positive, we stop there, report it as a positive HIV patient with post-test counseling. Whereas if the second test is negative, we go for a third test. And now what happens is, if the third test turns out to be positive, we say it as indeterminate. Okay, so if the first test is positive and the third test is positive and the second test is negative, we term it as indeterminate. And suppose if the third test is also negative, we say it as negative. Okay, so 1 test positive, 2 test negative is reported as negative. 2 test positive and 1 test negative is reported as indeterminate. Now you need to know what this indeterminate result means. So when we get such a result, what happens is we advise the patient to test it once again after 2 to 4 weeks, and the sample should be sent to the reference center for confirmation by Western blot or RT-PCR. So that's what we mean by indeterminate. So whenever we have an indeterminate patient, you need to repeat the testing after 2 to 4 weeks. Okay, right, because this term will come in the next strategy. So I would like you to understand the meaning of this term indeterminate now itself. Right, now what does the algorithm stand for in category 3? So in category 3, we are also using 3 tests or 3 different testing methods here, and this is done to detect HIV infection in asymptomatic individuals. Okay, so we are doing it for detecting infection in asymptomatic individuals. Right, so we do a first test. If it is positive, proceed. Negative, report negative then and there, and then finish the diagnosis of HIV infection. Now if it is positive, we employ a second testing method. So if both the first test and the second is positive, we go for a third test. Okay, now in third test, 2 combination is possible. Either this third test can be positive or this third test can be negative. Okay, now if the third test is positive, we report it as positive with post-test counseling. If it is negative, it becomes indeterminate. Okay, so here 2 testing positive and 1 test negative reported as indeterminate. This particular wing is similar to that of your strategy 2A. Okay, you can see it here. Similar, same policy. Now, how it differs from 2A is by this one. Now, this particular wing. So what happens here is, suppose the first test turns out to be positive, you do a second testing, and now the second testing also turns out to be negative, then you do a third testing. Okay, now if by doing a third testing, now there are again 2 possibilities. Third test can be positive or negative. Let's say if the first test is positive, second is negative, and third is positive, again we report it as indeterminate. Okay, this is what is unique to the strategy 3. Okay, strategy 3, I'll just show you. This is what is very unique. Now, if the first test is positive and the second and the third test are negative, we report here as negative. Okay, but whereas the same thing, if it happens in 2A, we say it is if we get 2 tests positive, we say it is indeterminate. So but here, if it is positive and the second and the third test are negative, we say it is negative. Okay, so I will just recap the strategy 3 once again. If one test becomes positive, second test is done. If the second test is also positive, third test is done. If all the 3 tests are positive, it is considered positive. Okay, now if the third test is negative and the first 2 tests are positive, it is indeterminate. Similarly, if we do a second test, if it turns out to be negative and the third test turns out to be positive, both these categories we label it as indeterminate. Okay, whereas if the second test and the third test are negative, we report it as negative. Okay, so these are the different testing strategies of NACO, or the National AIDS Control Organization. Here you need to remember that 3 testing methods with 3 different principles must be used. Okay, so there is no dilution in this particular aspect. Only when it is positive, you have to give by all the 3 tests, you should label a person as HIV positive, except for strategy 1, where only 1 testing is required here. Okay, here for strategy 2A also only 2 testing is required, 2 different tests is required, but for strategy 2B and strategy 3, you require 3 testing methods. Okay, right, I hope you have understood right now. Okay, so we now go on to the treatment for HIV. Now, for treating HIV, we use something called as the HAART therapy, which is highly active antiretroviral therapy. So the primary goal of antiretroviral therapy is to prolong the life and obviously improve the quality of life and stop the progression of HIV infection, and also to achieve the greatest possible reduction in the viral load as long as possible, and for immunologically ensuring that there is both quantitative and qualitative improvement, and also to ensure the reduction of HIV transmission in individuals. Now, previously NACO guidelines were insistent on doing a CD4 T cell count, categorizing the stage of disease, and also to find out the opportunistic infections, and also to consider pregnant and breastfeeding women status among the women. So all these categories were considered to start the HAART therapy, but the revised guidelines in 2017 states that this therapy has to be started in all the patients irrespective of CD4 count, clinical stage, age, population, or any other associated opportunistic infections. Okay, so having said that, we now need to know the different classes of antiviral drugs. So on one side we have the reverse transcriptase inhibitors. On the other side we have the protease inhibitors. Then we have the integrase inhibitors. Then we have the fusion inhibitors. Okay, your reverse transcriptase inhibitors basically ensure that the reverse transcriptase enzyme is inhibited and the viral RNA is prevented from converting itself to viral DNA. Okay, so that is the main role of reverse transcriptase inhibitors. There are two classes. You have NRTI, that is nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which are zidovudin, stavudin, lamivudin, zalcitabine and emtricitabine. And then you have NNRTIs, which are nothing but non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, and basically they are efavirenz, nevirapine, delavirdin, etaviridin. Okay, so these are the non-reverse transcriptase inhibitors. Okay, now what about protease inhibitors? Now protease inhibitors are those which prevent the viral replication from taking place by preventing the this particular stage of budding. Okay, so they inhibit that, and all the protease inhibitors end with VIR. Okay, so you have saquinavir, ritonavir, nefiravir, amprenavir, indinavir, lopinavir. Okay, so all these drugs are protease inhibitors. Then you have integrase inhibitors. Okay, so integrase inhibitors prevent the viral assembly during the replication, and you have raltegravir. Okay, then you have fusion inhibitors. These fusion inhibitors prevent the virus from binding to the receptors in the target cells, CCR5 receptors, and in the target cell. Okay, so these fusion inhibitors are enfuvirtide and maraviroc. So these are the other fusion inhibitors. Your maraviroc is also a CCR5 receptor inhibitor. Okay, right. So these are the different types of heart therapy regimens which are available. Now, how is the treatment carried out? So you have two lines. You have a first line regimen and then you have a second line regimen. Okay, so in the first line regimen, NACO recommends to include 3 drugs, that is 2 NRTIs or NTRI plus 1 NNRTI. The standard recommended regimen is TLE, that is tenofovir, lamivudin and efavirenz. Okay, so it should be started for all the new patient as single dose daily regimens, right? And for children less than 30 kgs, it is ALE, abacavir, lamivudin, efavirenz. Okay, for neonates, it is syrup nevirapine given at 6 to 12 weeks. Okay, so this is for the neonates. And those who are on older regimens, that is the previous, as per the previous guidelines, like ZLN, that is zidovudin, lamivudin, nevirapine, zidovudin, lamivudin, efavirenz, tenofovir, lamivudin, nevirapine. So all those people who are on older regimens and who are responding well to the therapy may be continued. Okay, second line regimen is only considered when the patient is not responding to primary regimen or the patient develops toxicity. Then we switch over to protease inhibitors based regimen. So you give 1 protease inhibitor plus 2 NRTIs or NTRIs, right? So what do we do here? What drugs do we give here? We give tenofovir plus lamivudin plus lopinavir, ritonavir. So we give all these 3 regimens. So please also remember that this is the primary heart regimen for HIV infection, but you should also remember to treat the opportunistic infections appropriately with the proper antimicrobial agents before starting ART. And especially for pneumocystis pneumonia, we recommend the cotrimoxazole prophylaxis So especially when we have HIV infected individual with CD4 less than 200, or those who are in the WHO clinical stage 3 or stage 4 disease, irrespective of the CD4 count. So we recommend the your cotrimoxazole prophylaxis for pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia. Now, there are several challenges associated with antiretrovirals. Now, this is the practical point of view which most of us doctors should be aware of. One is there is high cost involved. It must be definitely taken for lifelong, because these drugs do not kill all the viruses or cure the disease, but they definitely do improve the quality of life. There is a problem of resistance. There is a potential for having side effects. I'll be telling about it little later. And then regular lab monitoring is required. And if you look at the adverse effects, you have a whole list of them, starting from your abdominal pain, alopecia, diarrhea, dizziness, hyperbilirubinemia, hyperpigmentation, cholesterolemias, lipodystrophy, liver failure, neutropenia, oral ulcer, renal failure. So you can have a whole range of side effects. So therefore, it is very, very important to ensure the compliance. Okay. Now, we now come to the needle stick injury component of HIV. Now, if you have, or if any healthcare worker has a needle stick injury, we generally consider three primary viral agents. You have HIV virus, you have hepatitis C virus, and hepatitis B virus. So the percentage of transmission of HIV is surprisingly and very, 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 very low when compared to that of hepatitis C and hepatitis B. Okay, so please remember this. Human immunodeficiency virus has got only 0.3% chances of causing a needle stick injury and 0.09% chances of having a mucous membrane exposure in case of the blood spillage, etc. So if you look at the hepatitis C virus, you have a much higher chance, 1 to 1.8%. Hepatitis B, 30%. So that's why hepatitis B vaccination is mandatory for all the healthcare workers. See, hepatitis B is a greater villain than HIV. Okay, so this is the take home point. But since this presentation is restricted only to HIV, I will just be briefly telling you about what one should do in the event of exposure to a needle stick injuries. First and foremost, remove the gloves. If you are doing a surgery or anything, if it gets embedded, the needle, immediately remove the gloves. If it gets pricked or anything, please remove the gloves and wash the exposed side thoroughly. This is the highlight. Washing thoroughly with running water. Okay, within inverted quotes, please keep in mind it should be a running water wash. Okay, if suppose you get the splash on your eyes or mouth, then what you should do is you have to irrigate your eyes with water or saline. You should be comfortably seated in the chair. Just tilt your head upwards. Tell your colleague to gently put one drop after the other, okay, gently into the eyes or the mouth for at least 5 minutes. Okay, and then what we should do, wash with the skin with the soap and water. So all these are the do's. Immediately what you should do. What you shouldn't do is not to panic. It's always our tendency to immediately put the finger in our mouth. So that should not be done at any cost. Please remember, that should not be done at any cost. But because, as I already mentioned, the risk of mucous membrane exposure always is present with the HIV. Next thing what you should not do is, don't squeeze the wound to bleed it. What will happen is, by squeezing the wound, you are increasing the capillary pressure, and once you release your finger, the blood will flow backwards and becomes a disaster. Please do not use bleach, chlorine or alcohol, betadine or any other antiseptics or detergents on the wounds. Okay, So this is what you should not do. Once you have done this preliminary thing, you immediately kindly inform your unit head, department head, also your infection control team, your infection control members has to be, officer has to be informed in the event of a needle stick injury, so that further course can be done. Now whatever I am stating for the post exposure prophylaxis for HIV has been taken from the National Technical Guidelines on Antiretroviral Treatment of the NACO of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, October 2018. Okay, so what you should know now is the first dose of post exposure prophylaxis should be taken immediately within 2 hours. Okay, or earlier. If you can take it within half an hour, it's the best thing that you can do. Or but the first dose should not be delayed more than 72 hours, because there is little benefit. Okay, now there are most of the healthcare workers, I'll tell you what happens is at in my little experience, most of the healthcare workers get so much panic and anxious that they don't report immediately. So what happens is most of them we come to know only after 72 hours. So what can we do? Can we still give the first dose? Yes, definitely should be given, but you should be explaining to that healthcare worker that you will not get the benefit of taking the first dose of post exposure prophylaxis earlier than 72 hours. Again, as I mentioned in the first part of my second lecture series, or the second video, consent is definitely not required for giving the first dose, but it is definitely required for the full course. Okay, first dose you can give it without even the consent, but for the subsequent course, the 31 days course, okay, you definitely require consent. Suppose the healthcare worker doesn't want to take the full course, it should be obtained in writing from that person that he or she is not willing to go for the testing methods. So this is one of the testing which are done in one of the tertiary care setups. So the recommended testing time is usually within 6 days of the exposure, or within 6 days of the event. Okay, because those people who are on standard regimen, your complete blood count and transaminases should be definitely checked. Okay, if suppose that particular exposed person is on PEP regimen, the complete blood count and transaminase should be checked. And again, without even mentioning it, all tests should be done only after the informed consent with proper counseling, ensuring proper confidentiality. So you can go for ELISA test as a screening test, or CLIA or ELPHA. Okay, this can be extrapolated to even your NACO testing strategies. Remember, I told you 3 tests are required. So you can go for a ELISA or CLIA, and then go for a 4th generation point of care dot blot testing method. Okay, tri-dot testing. Okay, where you can check for both the HIV antibodies and P24 antigen, and then to confirm you can go for a PCR, both RNA or DNA, depending on the whether it is an adult or a child. So you can detect PCR. It will be positive for HIV in as early as 10th day, and also especially during the window period. And inclusion of P24 antigen definitely will ensure that we pick up even cases in the window period. Okay, so that is what you should know. Now, once we do the testing, you have informed the infection control officer, you have taken the first dose, you are going ahead doing the testing, and suppose you have finished the testing. What the infection control officer does is, he or she will find out the exposure code and the source code. Now, how do you note the exposure code? First thing to be asked is the source material blood bloody fluid or other potentially infected material, or an instrument contaminated with any of these substances. So we are going to ask this question to the healthcare worker. Suppose he says no, then immediately no PP or post exposure prophylaxis is required. Suppose the healthcare worker says yes, then we are going to assess the type of exposure. Suppose the needle has gone only up to the skin, in the intact skin, then again no PP is required. Suppose the mucous membrane or the skin integrity has been compromised, we go for the volume. Okay, we will find out how much is the volume. So if the volume is a small volume and the duration of exposure is short, then we label as EC1. Okay, then if the volume is large and if it has been exposed for a longer duration, we say it is EC2. Remember, there are two places where this EC2 comes. Okay, now suppose if the patient has got a percutaneous exposure, you assess the severity and you find out that a solid needle is implicated in this event, causing a superficial scratch. This is also labeled as EC2. Okay, so please remember, mucous membrane, large volume exposure, and percutaneous solid needle superficial scratch, all these entities are coded as EC2. Suppose if it is a percutaneous injury with a hollow bore needle and it's a deep injury, then you label it as EC3. Okay, now you have labeled the exposure code. Now how do we detect the source code? So source code is done in those patients or those healthcare workers from whom the proposed or the alleged event has occurred. Okay, now for the exposure we need to find out the source. Now if the HIV is negative, okay, if there is a documented evidence of HIV negative status, then again no PP required. But if the patient is HIV positive, then you need to find out two things. Is it a low titer or asymptomatic person with a high CD4 count, or is it a high titer exposure in a person with an advanced disease and having a low CD4 count? So if it is a low titer high CD4 count, you label it as HIV source code 1 or SC1. If it is a high titer advanced disease with low CD4 count, you label it as HIV SC2 or source code 2. And the third category is if we don't know the status of the patient. Now, this is what happens most of the times. Okay, the source is unknown. The healthcare worker might have got the injury while discarding the biomedical waste, and the needle has been wrongly discarded in the, let's say, yellow cover or a red cover instead of putting in the sharps container, and while collecting he gets an accidental needle prick. Okay, so in such situations we don't know the source, so it is called as source code unknown. Now after determining the source code and exposure code, this is when we go for PEP or post exposure prophylaxis. Now we undertake the post exposure prophylaxis based on this. Now please remember, the standard recommended duration of post exposure prophylaxis is 28 days. I am sorry that previously I had mentioned 31 days. It is not 31, it is 28 days. Let me repeat, the standard post exposure prophylaxis recommended duration is 28 days. Okay, now this table kind of looks quite busy, so just to keep it very simple, what you need to remember is, if the HIV source code is negative or 1, please remember, when I say negative, I mean a documented negative case. Okay, so if the HIV source code is negative or 1 or unknown, whatever be the exposure code, you do not require to give a post exposure prophylaxis. I repeat, if the HIV source code is labeled as negative or documented or 1, or unknown, okay, -1 or unknown, irrespective of whatever your exposure code is, you do not require to give a post exposure prophylaxis. For all the other situations, you need to give post exposure prophylaxis. Now I told you SC code unknown, you don't need to give a post exposure prophylaxis. There is a small subclause here. If in your area the HIV prevalence is high in a given population, then even though the source code is unknown, we need to consider post exposure prophylaxis. Please remember this. So starting a post exposure prophylaxis regimen, if the source code is unknown, is entirely dependent on the HIV prevalence of the particular endemic area. Okay, and when we say source material, we include all the sterile body fluids or any instruments or other blood or body fluids, including pleurals, pericardial, amniotic fluid, or even pus. Okay, right. So how do we take a decision during the window period? Now, again, it depends on the prevalence of the infection. If it is a high prevalence area, it is indicated. Why? Because there is a higher proportion of cases in that area. So obviously we require to consider starting a PEP. Whereas in a low prevalence area, PEP is not required. Okay. So I am just reiterating what I mentioned in the previous slides. So what are the regimens which are indicated for post-exposure prophylaxis? This also includes sexual assault. So the NACO guidelines clearly states that all the antiretroviral drugs should also be extended to such individuals. Now, if the adult or a pregnant woman is exposed, then we give a primary regimen of tenofovir or lamivudine. Okay, this is the 2018 guideline. This is what the NACO 2018 guideline says. Tenofovir or lamivudine. Tenofovir 300, lamivudine 300 as an FDC, that is fixed dose combination tablet, only one tablet OD for 28 days. Okay, so please keep this in mind. Regimens for post-exposure prophylaxis in adults, pregnant women, T plus L, 28 days OD. You can also give your TLE, tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz, or lopinavir, ritonavir. If you are giving TLE regimen, then you have to give again FDC for 28 days. If you are giving lopinavir or ritonavir, you have to give 2 tablets. Okay, all the fixed dose combinations are coming in 1 tablet. So if you are want to administer lopinavir, ritonavir, you have to give 2 tablets twice daily for 28 days. What do we do in children? We have to calculate the weight of the weight of the child, and as per the weight band indicated in the National Pediatric ART dosing schedule, we require to give the drugs. Okay, so the primary drug for children for post-exposure prophylaxis is ZLL, zidovudine, lamivudine, lopinavir, ritonavir, given for 28 days. You can substitute zidovudine with abacavir, or you can substitute lopinavir with efavirenz. Okay, if you are giving efavirenz, you should make sure that it is given in children only greater than 3 years of age who are having greater than 10 kgs weight. You should never give it in children less than 3 years with less than 10 kg weight. Okay, and all the doses are given in detail in these NACO guidelines. You can refer to it. And you have to calculate the weight of the child and refer to the National Pediatric ART dosing schedule. Okay, now the person is started on post-exposure prophylaxis, and I gave you a big list of side effects which can usually occur. Now, how do you manage these side effects? or when do you think that the drugs or the post exposure prophylaxis regimen should be stopped? Okay, please remember the commonest side effects encountered are nausea, headache, diarrhea, fatigue, CNS side effects, rash, fever, jaundice, liver tenderness, and low blood counts. Okay, and please remember here also that nausea and headache and diarrhea, these three are usually self-limited. Okay, so only if it persists for more than 2 weeks we need to be seek the referral. Otherwise you just take the symptomatic treatment. Okay, if it is headache, treat with paracetamol, diarrhea, hydrate. But if there is fatigue, if it usually persists only for 4 to 6 weeks, and the healthcare worker here is entitled to take a sick leave if he has a fatigue, and referral should only be sought for if it persists for more than 6 weeks. CNS side effects usually seen with efavirenz. So to avoid the CNS side effects, nightmares, depression, take it the night before sleeping and with amitriptyline. If there is a rash, again look for whether it is a dry or a wet lesion. Usually it is seen only with efavirenz. Okay, and you have to stop the drug for generalized peeling. Okay, for fever you have to assess for acute hepatitis or other non-HIV infections and refer. Again, jaundice and liver tenderness. Please remember, my dear students, that only for this particular side effect, jaundice or liver tenderness, you have to immediately stop the ART and send for the alanine transaminase test or the liver enzyme testing and then refer. So even low blood counts usually you see only with zidovudine. So you have to keep on monitoring the complete blood count, baseline the values 2 weeks and 4 weeks after the starting the post exposure prophylaxis. So the moral of the story is that we should not stop the post exposure prophylaxis regimen for any of the patients. More than 95% of compliance should be ensured to the PEP schedule. Therefore, you require proper counseling, constant reassurance. Okay, you encourage the healthcare worker or the exposed person to get full course of PEP, and make sure that you do it only after an informed and a written consent, because of so many of these side effects which you can usually expect following the initiation of post exposure prophylaxis. And if the healthcare worker refuses to take the PEP regimen, this has to be documented for legal purposes. Okay, so I hope you are very clear about when to stop the treatment. Now let's say this healthcare personnel has been taking and is doing very much compliant with the regimen. So what all counseling should be done? So when the person is on post exposure prophylaxis, we need to warn the person for any possible drug interactions. So whenever other drugs are given, they may have interaction with the PEP regimen, and the need for adherence, as I mentioned before, should be emphasized. Okay, if it's a woman, avoid pregnancy and breastfeeding, and also discourage blood organ or sperm donation and unsafe sex. And for the monitoring the progress of the test your post exposure prophylaxis regimen, we need to do the antibody testing. Okay, HIV antibody testing is required 6 weeks, 3 months and 6 months. Those patients on zidovudine, we need to give a complete blood count analysis. Okay, it must be done on 2nd week and 4th week for patients on zidovudine. Otherwise, you have to do the antibody testing at 6 weeks, 3 months and 6 months. Keep in mind, please remember, I told you RNA PCR testing is very good for monitoring progress to treatment. But please remember, this is the post exposure prophylaxis, and Doing a HIV RNA PCR has got basically no role in RNA in the post exposure prophylaxis. Okay, when a healthcare worker is undergoing PP regimen, there is no role for HIV RNA PCR. For the next 3 to 6 weeks after initiating PP regimen, the healthcare worker should be monitored for acute seroconversion illness. Usually it is seen in around 50 to 70 percentage of individuals. Okay, that's quite a bit within 3 to 4 weeks of exposure. And how do you identify it? By symptoms like fever, lymphadenopathy, flu-like prodromal illnesses, cutaneous eruptions, pharyngitis, mouth ulcers, or genital ulcers. Now we come to the prevention part. How do we prevent? A, B, C. Abstain, be faithful, use condoms. Okay, and you ensure that you provide proper counseling, ensure a behavioral modification, and also educate the patient for preventing the particular infection. Contaminated syringes or needles should never be shared. Even when you are drawing blood from the patient, please remember, never recap the needle. Please, I am repeating, don't recap the needle. All the blood and blood products should be screened for HIV infection. Please also remember that these products should also be screened for hepatitis C and hepatitis B viruses. Universal precautions should be followed while handling the sample. I've already mentioned about the triple packaging of transport of the sample. Administer short course of ART to decrease the mother to child transmission, and avoid breastfeeding, which I've already mentioned. So I hope you are now well versed with the different the disease pathogenesis, clinical features, lab diagnosis, post exposure prophylaxis, and treatment. If you have any confusions or clarifications, you can always communicate with me through the chat box, or you can in the comment section, or you can refer once again to my previous 2 videos, and you will be able to get a hang of it. Thank you all for your patient listening.